I wanted to be a professional pool player when I was 15. I never went to high school. So he was working there for a month. I would go to the pool hall during the day for the whole day, but he had to work.
Okay.
So he wouldn't come in till 6 o'clock at night. And every night he'd come in and say, Warren, you got to get a job at Geo. You got to get a job at Geo. And I said, well, look, how much could we make there? And he says, look, I'm making $500 a month. And I said, like 5 days a week? John DeLorean, Pete Estes, the president of the company, I beat Minnesota Fats once. And the chief engineer at the time was a fellow by the name of Bob Stempel, who ultimately became the president of General Motors. They said, you really did a good job here. Everybody's impressed, blah, blah, blah. And when you get back to Detroit, I got to tell you, we're going to do something for you. And I said, Jack, sit down. I got something to tell you. I'm resigning today. I don't think I deserve to be fired. I'm not hearing anything he's saying. All I'm thinking about is what I'm going to tell Janet. What am I going to tell my 3 kids? And he said, no. We want you to run the business. This was real money, and it was a win or lose. And if you didn't look at it that way, we would be in trouble. And that's when I was down in Brazil, I got the nickname Dr. Death. I guess I can say it because it's been a while, so I'm not telling any state secrets here. So, Jeff, you're hearing this for the first time on your podcast. When I arrived, we were losing about $110 million a year. The whole approach, we went from $110 million in Brazil loss to over $1.5 billion of profit. I was sent down to Brazil by Jack Smith to help them improve their product program. And my car won't start. And I get on the phone and I call Carlos Buchler, who was the chief engineer. I said, Carlos, your guys dropped off a car for me, but it won't start. What's going on here? And he said, did you pull out the choke? In December of 1999, I went to Poland to work. It was dark. Wagner comes into me. He said, I need to move. I need somebody to go to Russia. I had a full-time driver, which was fantastic. I had the only white Escalade in Russia. Because I'm in charge of all of your warranty audits. I'm doing this in Portuguese now.
Yeah.
Because I'm in charge of all of your warranty audits and all of your service rules, I suggest that you guys talk to me a lot nicer than you have been for the last 15 minutes.
Jeff Stearns, connected through cars. If they're bigwigs, we'll have them on the show. And yes, we'll talk about cars and everything else. Here he is now, Jeff Stearns.
I'm with Warren Brown. I'm Jeff Stearns on Jeff Stearns Connected Through Cars. And mainly, we've been talking to people that I met through the car business. But actually, I didn't meet Warren through the car business, even though he's a stone car guy. So, I mean, look, in case the recording stops and we get rid of everything else less relevant, maybe we should just talk about how did we meet?
Yeah, because it wasn't through the car business. We decided to go down to Florida when we stopped taking cruises. And in the initial days, we used to, rent small little apartments. And then, one day my wife said, we're tired of renting apartments. Why don't we get a house that's on the bay? We can look at the ocean, drink cocktails in the evening, and enjoy ourselves. I said, good idea. My wife is the world's research expert. So I said, go get it.
Right.
And she came back and she says, I found a great house. I said, fantastic. She said, it's right on the bay and it's in beautiful Palm Harbor. It was through that I met you, Jeff. And from the moment you came upstairs and said, okay, I'm Jeff Stearns, just tell me what you need. And so we just came to know you, Jeff, and enjoyed every single year we stayed at your place. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you. And you guys became family to me for sure. And so when we came up with this podcast idea, and I don't know how it is for you, but with me, 35 years plus minus in the car business, whether it be retail or now my software and consulting I do with dealers. At dinner, I'll call them the civilian, always wants to know what's the cool thing that you drove or who's the cool person that you met. Of course, I got to hear a few of your stories out by the pool, out by the barbecue, and you were very gracious to agree to join us here and hopefully give our guests something interesting to take home. You're with GM for a short time.
We would call it a short time. It's kind of like the half-life. I spent 40 years there. I went to work for GM in 1969 on a lark, which was, a lot of things in life. You're either lucky or you have skills that help you out. And in my particular case, it was luck. I wanted to be a professional pool player when I was 15. So I would sneak into the pool hall looking much older than I did. And the owner never asked me how old I was. So I was playing pool with guys when I was 15, wanting to be a professional. I never went to high school. I think I had the maximum number of days off that you could have in the state of Michigan and actually pass into the next grade. So that was a first piece of luck. And then, going through high school and then graduated. And one of my buddies who has since passed away, and he was kind of like my pool hall buddy. As a matter of fact, Jeff, we went down to Cocoa Beach, Florida. On the first year I got laid off and went on the road to play pool in Cocoa Beach, Florida, and stayed down there for a couple of weeks just living off playing pool, right?
Now, was this like the movie The Hustler with Jackie Gleason?
Kind of like that.
Okay.
Kind of like that. Back the car up to the front of the door because when the guy pays me off, I'm going to run out because he's got 6 buddies and we're going to get our butts kicked. So yeah, that really happened. He got a job. His dad knew somebody at GM, and he got a job as a driver, to drive stuff around the city. Because at the time, General Motors was gigantic, and they had offices all over. So they had to shuttle stuff in between. FedEx didn't exist at that time. So he was working there for a month. I would go to the pool hall during the day for the whole day, but he had to work.
Okay.
So he wouldn't come in till 6 o'clock at night. And every night he'd come in and say, "Warren, you got to get a job at GM. You got to get a job at GM." And I said, "Well, look, how much could we make there?" And he says, "Look, I'm making $500 a month." And I said, "Like 5 days a week?" And he said, "Yeah, it's $500 a month." And I said, "Tom, we make that in a week playing pool." He says, "You're making a big mistake." So on a lark, after pestering me for a month, I went down to GM and interviewed, never thinking that a guy with a D average in high school, General Motors is ever going to hire. But I went because I promised him that I'd go. Interviewed for a level 1 mailboy position, $495.50 a month. Nice guy. I can still remember his name, Don Smith. Nice guy, interviewed me and said, "Okay, we'll get back with you." And literally the next day they got back with me and said, "Can you start on Monday?" And I said, and I really took a deep breath. This is where luck plays a role in everybody's life. Okay, I'm going to do it. And I showed up on Monday morning and started as a level 1 mail boy. That's how I joined. And my first job, I worked at GM Photographic, and GM Photographic printed the executive menu for the dining room every day. So you can imagine the executive dining room at General Motors. Every day, I had to deliver that menu to the 14th floor, which was like the executive suite for General Motors. And it was on one of those visits that I said to myself, I got to go back to school. But it turned out to be really a stroke of luck. Throughout that, I came in contact with a whole host of, very, very interesting people, some who helped my career, others who taught me a lot of stuff, and I still talk to this very day. So that's how it started, whatever it was.
So you start in the mailroom. You start almost as a challenge from your buddy, like, okay, I'll go apply.
Exactly.
You don't half-heartedly hope they don't take you. You really kind of hope they just say no, but you kept your deal with your buddy. They call and they say you got the gig. your stomach drops a little.
Yep.
But because you said you would for really no other reason. You weren't thinking career. You were thinking minimum wage mentality, summer job, bagger at a grocery store kind of a gig.
Yeah, and I'm glad I did, because just like, everybody realizes who skis, they're not Jean-Claude Keely. Everybody who plays tag football or basketball knows that they're not going to make it to professional sports. Even though I beat Minnesota Fats once in a game of 8-ball. I was 16, and he was selling his pool tables at the time at a shopping mall by my house in Livonia. And so, because Fats was in town and he was selling his pool tables, you had to go up and see him, right? I mean, I was a pool player. We went up to see him, and he's doing one of these things of, hey, who in the audience wants to play a game of pool and show how the table works and all that stuff. And here I am, I'm jumping up and down. This is Minnesota Fats, and he says, okay, come here, play. We're going to play 8-ball, and you get to break. I said, okay. I broke and I ran out. He never played. He never got to play one shot. So I broke and ran out 8-ball, which is you got to hit all the stripes of the solids, and I forget which was which. And then I made the 8-ball, and he was left holding his cue stick. On the uptake, he said, see, folks, if you're playing on my table, anybody can play pool. So he used the whole thing as a foray into a sales shtick. Looking back on it was very, very impressive. At the time, I was just glad that I beat him. I take that as a victory, and I wouldn't play him for $1 if we were playing for real pool. But again, luck has a way of working its way in, and I was lucky.
That is beautiful. So with General Motors now, somehow you go from mail room to international executive.
Yeah.
Somehow you half your career, half of your 40 years, you were overseas, give or take.
I went to school, and I was still working. So for, both my undergrad and my graduate degree, I went to school at night with my wife, raised 2 kids at the time, and then ultimately 3 kids. It was just one of those things of, you just got to do it. There's no way around it. And when I graduated from my undergrad degree, the group that I was working for at the time, I switched mail boys jobs. I went from junior mail boy to senior mail boy. Okay, big step. All right.
Now you're going places.
The ultimate place that I went as the senior mail boy was the PR staff. And I guess the only thing of significance for that event that I can remember off the top of my head is every morning, first thing, 7:30 in the morning, which was tough for me, I had to deliver the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal to all of the offices on the 14th floor. Knew all the people, could walk into any of these guys' offices, say, hey, Warren, what's it going today? And I would literally, Ed Cole, who was the president of the company, or John DeLorean, who was, the hotshot of the company, walk into those offices and throw the papers on their chair, and they go, hey, what's going on? What happened in the news today? Same old stuff. And they'd laugh, that kind of stuff. But because I graduated, and they could have gotten me a job anywhere. I think that they were just tired of having me around, actually. So I graduated with my undergrad degree. They got me a job as a key puncher in a group that was doing all of the statistical analysis and sales analysis for the company. And this group was responsible for doing all the forward forecasts and all the production scheduling and all the economics and all that stuff. And literally, you couldn't work in the place unless you had a PhD. Really, really bright people. And so my job was to key punch in all of the information so that these guys could do the analysis of it, whether I was collecting it from wherever I was collecting. And the key was I got to sit in on that meeting, watching these whiz kids kind of figure out what sales were going to be next month or what sales were going to be next quarter or next year, and see the process that they went through. Now, one day, guy who changed my life, a guy by the name of Greg DeOnker, who was one of the head executives at the time, said, he took me aside and says, you seem to be a pretty smart guy. How would you like to be a auto analyst? I said, you're kidding me. No, I've seen you in the meetings. You know the data better than anybody else does. And when any of these eggheads ask a question, you know what the answer is because you know what the data is. He said, how would you like to be an auto analyst? I said, I don't know how to do any of that stuff. He said, let me worry about that. Let me worry about that. And I said, okay. And that's when I finally removed myself from mailboy data clerk to being an auto analyst. Well, if you remember, Jeff, and I know that you do, back in the 1970s, nobody cared about trucks. Other than a full-size pickup truck, General Motors was a car company. They said, here, nobody cares about trucks. Give it to Warren. Well, that was a stroke of luck because we need to put on a presentation for Pete Estes, the president of the company, on the truck market. And you're the only one that knows the stuff. We did that, and I kind of became the truck expert. Well, for a long, long time, the S10 pickup truck, which was the precursor to the current Chevrolet Colorado, a mid-sized pickup truck, okay, not a full-size pickup truck. It was gaining momentum inside the company, and the chief engineer at the time was a fellow by the name of Bob Stempel, who ultimately became the president of General Motors. It was Greg DeOnker and I, the pro S10 people, versus Bob Stempel and Chevrolet. This is 1974-75, biggest snowstorm in the history of Detroit, 28 inches one day. I was taking the bus into work at the time from my house downtown. I had to be in there early, so taking the bus at 6:30, we're the only ones on the road, but the bus is going, and it hits the GM building. At noon, they came around and said, if you're not an essential worker, go home. And so my boss comes into the office and says, we've got a meeting at 4:00 with Pete Estes. You're not going home. You're staying. You're helping with the presentation. You're writing all the data. We got a major controversy with Chevrolet. We have the meeting at 4:00. We get done with the presentation. Estes goes, okay, this is what we need to do. This is Friday night. We need to have the final technical review of the truck and the presentation that's going on Monday. And there's one small person who in the back of the room was just, but Pete, we just had 28 inches of snow. Pete looks up and says, well, get the people to blow open the tech center and blow all the snow away. We're having this meeting tomorrow morning at 8:00. Nobody said anything. The guy walked out of the room. I'm sure he had to order like 20 snow blowers to blow, like big industrial snow blowers to blow the tech center open.
Well, Pete Estes, people need to understand the strength of General Motors at the time. A younger listener right now, this is like President of the United States.
Yeah, General Motors had about 48% of the market.
They had to be in the top some number of driving the United States economy.
Well, yeah, the old, if it's good for General Motors, it's good for the United States. They keep on forgetting, and vice versa. It was a big deal. And when he talked, nobody said anything after that. They're going to have the meeting.
Right.
That was the first time in my life, the day of the 28 inches of snow, that was the first time in my life that I worked the whole night. Didn't go home. We're going to have a presentation for Estes at 8:00 on Saturday morning at the tech center. We were done at 7:00 in the morning, and my boss just told me, you go home. I'll give the presentation. You don't need to worry about it. Estes is already seen. You give the preliminary version. So I'll just go out to the tech center and do the final version. But I guess the key piece of the story that maybe I'm not getting well is when he said, we're just going to blow open the snow in the tech center. We're having the meeting tomorrow. There was no, everybody, it's Saturday, Pete, and, it's snow and 28 inches of snow in Detroit. Everybody just saluted. The tech center was open with no snow at 8:00 the next morning. Before I went overseas, I actually left GM. I was working out at Truck and Bus, and I worked on a thing called the World Van Program. The research is done in Chicago. It was going to be a 5-city, 2-continent research. And they had every key executive from truck and bus. At the end of the day, my boss calls me over and he says, everybody at Truck and Bus is really, really impressive. By the way, it was the first research project General Motors had ever done. No paper. Everything was done on computer. No filling out the forms and et cetera. He says, you really did a good job here. Everybody's impressed, blah, blah, blah. And when you get back to Detroit, I got to tell you, we're going to do something for you. And I said, Jack, sit down. I got something to tell you. I'm resigning today. He said, what? I don't think I heard you right. I'm quitting today. I'm going to work for Ward's Automotive. I'm going to be their vice president of marketing services. And tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock California time, I have a meeting at Nissan. I'm not going back to Detroit.
And Warren, for the listener that doesn't necessarily know what Ward's is, this is Ward's Detroit magazine.
This was the magazine and the group that owned Ward's at the time. They wanted to get into the publishing business in electronics. So they were doing their magazine and their weekly newsletter and all of the stuff that they still do today. Only they wanted to branch out and do things electronically. And the group that I went to work for was a branch of Ward's called Ward's Research. And we were tasked with no paper. Every product that you will deliver to customers, sales, analysis, whatever, we're going to deliver that through a computer, through an IBM PC, single disk drive, external hard disk with a modem. That was high tech.
This was really forward thinking, though, because there was a lot of resistance in that industry.
Oh, sure. I mean, the company that owned them was International Thompson, a big Canadian publisher, who publishes all the medical journals, and they owned the Toronto Star or whatever the Toronto paper was, but they wanted to get out of it. So the whiz kids that I went to work for knew all about PCs, transmission, data, etc. And I knew the car business. So we put those two together. I fly out to Nissan that day, and I'm giving a presentation to Jim Thomas, the vice president of sales for Nissan North America, about what we were going to provide to them. Mr. Big Shot GM, right? And at the end of the presentation, Jim Thomas, bless his heart, said to me, Warren, that's a great presentation. And I think we kind of like what you can provide for us in terms of sales analysis, and helping Nissan grow the business in the United States. He says, but can you do me a favor? He says, your presentation had like Chrysler cars on it and Ford cars on it and General Motors cars on it. And he said, just do me a favor. The next time you come back to Nissan, we don't compare ourselves to those guys. Come back and show me a comparison versus Toyota or Honda, because that's who we care about. Jeff, I felt 2 inches tall. I went from big shot General Motors to my first real dose of outside of the cocoon in one day.
You're swaggering, like gracing Nissan. And they're like, yeah, we don't really care about that stuff.
Fast forward 6 months. We all get called to Philadelphia, which is where the headquarters of Thompson was at the time. All of us, all the whiz kids, are sitting around the conference room with my boss, who hired me out of GM. And they knock on the door, open it, and go, Bill, you need to go first. And we're wondering, are we going to get like an early Christmas bonus? Are we going to get like a big pat on the back and a trip to South Beach for all the stuff that we've been doing?
You're really expecting the pageantry for the unbelievable work you've been doing.
I mean, we had Honda, Nissan, Mitsubishi, BMW, Chrysler, Chevrolet, which is how I ultimately got back into GM, because Chevrolet was my client at the time. And a bunch of suppliers, Borg Warner. Nevertheless, in a period of 6 months, we had signed business. So I'm expecting the horns to toot. My boss is out there for about 10 minutes, and he comes back. And we said, okay, where's the horns? What's happening? He said, I was fired. And you know me long enough. Who's going to be the first guy to speak up in the room?
Not a shocker there. I don't even need to know who the others were.
I said, why'd you get fired? And he said, because we're not going to meet our budget. Big shot GM guy who knew everything about the real world, right? What do you mean we're not going to meet our budget? Key question was, for the first time, Bill, what's our budget? And he said, $10 million. Everybody else has got their head buried in their arms on the table. And I said, Bill, there's no way. We're selling our product at $50,000 a pop. There's no way that we're going to make a $10 million budget this year. Who in the heck gave them the $10 million? I did. Well, what did you do that for? And he looked up without batting an eye, without a twitch in his mouth, said, Warren, you drive a BMW company car, don't you? He said, yeah. He said, and when we go out to California, we stay at the Beverly Wilshire Hotel, don't we? I said, yeah. And he said, and we gave you an American Express Gold card, and you do all of your expenses on it, and you never have to submit an expense report, right? Because you're running your business, right? Yeah. What's the point? He said, how do you think you get all of that stuff if you don't promise somebody you're going to deliver? Jeff, that was like Moses parting the Red Sea for me, because I never had to think in those terms at General Motors.
A slightly wasteful culture.
Next knock at the door. Warren, you're next. I quit GM after 14 years against my father-in-law's wishes. I got 3 kids. Sure, I was making the big bucks. So I'm walking down that hallway thinking what I'm going to tell my wife. And I walk into the office and sit down. And the first thing that comes out of my mouth is, I don't think I deserve to be fired. And it wasn't until, how you like a bomb goes off and you can't hear things for, 2 minutes until your ears clear. I'm not hearing anything he's saying. All I'm thinking about is what I'm going to tell Janet. What am I going to tell my 3 kids? And he said, no. We want you to run the business. So you're in charge now. You mean you're not firing me? No, you're in charge. Okay, we're going to reset your budget. You're in charge. Come back next week. We'll figure out what your new budget is, and we'll go off. So I walk back into the conference room. They go, okay, what happened to you? Well, they want me to run the business. And my boss, who has hired me out of General Motors, says that's BS. That's BS. We should just all quit and go start our own company. Nobody said a thing but me. And I said, Bill, these guys may want to do that, but I've got a wife and 3 kids, and I'm not going to leap off of a cliff because you think that it's the right thing to do for us. I'm doing this for me, right? And so everybody went off and did their own thing. I stuck around for about 6 months. And because I had Chevrolet as a customer, we were delivering to Chevrolet at the time. You could go onto our system, 1985, you could go onto our system and comparably equip any model that was being sold in the United States, compare it at base, compare it at comparably equipped, and compare it at popularly equipped by just picking it off of a menu. 1985.
Okay, I can picture it.
And the guys at Chevrolet loved it. The guys at EDS hated me because we were selling software and they wanted to be in charge. And because of that, they ultimately asked me to come back to GM and come back and work back in North America and do the research, do all the market research and all of the analysis. Again, a little bit of a stroke of luck. But, that life lesson, when you look and you think, I jumped from General Motors. I never asked a budget question. I never asked a performance question. All I wanted to know was, how much am I going to get paid? And I think that that's a mistake.
Really quite a paradigm shift.
Oh, from living in the cocoon and then leaving the cocoon and getting slapped really hard. And that budget discussion, I stored that in the back of my head for every business case that I would evaluate for General Motors over the next 15 to 20 years, that we were spending real money, not just somebody's budget account out of the finance department. This was real money, and it was a win or lose. And if you didn't look at it that way, we would be in trouble. And that's when I was down in Brazil, I got the nickname Dr. Death. I was once at a senior executive meeting in Traverse City, and I remember Mike Losh getting up and saying, how is it that we're losing our shirts and the last 11 programs that were approved by the board were all winners? Can somebody in the audience tell me how that happens? If you take engineering and fixed expense and investment as a given, and you figure out the volumes that's required to get the ROI up, they all look good on paper. They all look good on paper. And in Brazil, I took a different approach. Don't tell me what the investment is. Don't tell me what the engineering expense is. I never want to know the answer to that question. I'm going to tell you what the volume is, and then you tell me what you can afford. And if you need to take out investment and engineering expense to make it work, you guys have the job to do, not me.
So you'd back into what that expense line could be on the financial statement to make the project work based on volume.
Absolutely. In Brazil, when I was there for the 9 years that I was there, first 5 years were on program stuff. That was the approach. Rick Wagner signed off on that approach. And after him, Mark Hogan signed off on that approach, even though he didn't necessarily like it. But the approach of, we're going to sell 60,000 units of this product, and we need to have that return at 20% or more. What can we spend on engineering, and what can we spend on investment to get this done?
So Dr. Death, I mean, did this come from, if something wasn't adding up, you were doing big layoffs or cutting projects, or, I mean, where did the moniker come from?
No, because the culture was one of, we need to make this work because Big Daddy up in Detroit, they'll fund it. So we need to get what's right for us. And we just didn't take that approach. When Wagner came in and he ran the place, we just didn't take that approach. He liked the idea that we're going to make money. I guess I can say it because it's been a while, so I'm not telling any state secrets here. So, Jeff, you're hearing this for the first time on your podcast. When I arrived, we were losing about $110 million a year. This has mostly to do with Wagner and Hogan, who followed him, and Fritz Henderson, who later became the president of the company, who followed him.
And so is this all of General Motors or just Brazil division?
It's just all at General Motors.
Okay.
So the whole approach, we went from 110 million in Brazil loss to over $1.5 billion of profit. And this was a place that Roger Smith never wanted to put a nickel into. This was a place where I actually personally heard him say to the executive committee, would you put your money there? So General Motors isn't going to put any of their money there either. And then one day we were visiting Stempel, who was then group vice president of overseas, in charge of Brazil at least. He called Wagner and I into his office and said, Rick, you're on your own. You don't make your money. You don't self-generate your money down there. I can't help you. We're not making enough money up here. I'm not going to write a check for Brazil. You got to go down there and fix it yourself. And the only role that I played was given the latitude by Wagner to say, you just tell me what the volume is. You tell me how competitive the car is. And you tell me what the volume is. We'll figure out the investment in the engineering expense to get it done. And that's the way we're going to operate. But we went from bleeding to $1.5 billion pretty quick. And that was, I would say, a philosophy that Latin America used. And unfortunately, it was not a philosophy that was used by General Motors Europe. They just continued to bleed.
Let me ask you, please. I'm always interested in turnarounds like this, and I've been involved in turnaround situations myself in much smaller scale dealerships, et cetera. Would this be a type of iron fist management where it's just proving or turning down programs and decisions, or do you invest in the people from a culture standpoint where all the eyes on your team are looking at it for waste, for profitability opportunities, et cetera?
It was a combination of three things. The Brazilian culture at the manufacturing and sales level is a very, very can-do culture. If the direction is we're going to make this work, they'll make it work. If the direction was no, we're going to make money, they are the most dedicated, industrious group that I could work with. That was the first thing. So the culture was already there in terms of a work ethic. Maybe people think that Latin America is kind of a, mañana, we'll worry about it tomorrow. That's not the culture that was there. You had to be sure that you were picking the right products for the market. You can have a turnaround strategy, and if you have the wrong product for what the customer could afford or what the customer wanted, it didn't matter whether you had the right culture or not. So Wagner decided that we were going to be current, up to date with all the cars that came out of Opel, and we would be current with all of the trucks that came out of North America. So when I arrived, we had a Chevette, a 1982 thing called a Monza, which was a Cavalier. This is 1991, by the way. I want to get the right date sequence here. A 1967 full-size pickup truck, and a thing called an Opel Record, which was kind of like a full-size car. That was the product lineup, generating a $110 million loss.
And Warren, were all the Opels European imports, or were you building those also in Brazil?
All locally built. The manufacturing people in Brazil, Jack Smith once called Stephen Bogar the most comprehensive manufacturing executive he'd ever met, because they all had to do it all themselves. They all had to learn all by themselves. And nobody was coming down from central office to help them. So they had to do and learn a lot. So the level of competency that was that's what I call culture and competency in the Brazilian organization was pretty deep. But they were just all old products that they were locally manufactured. Remember, when I got there, inflation was 40% a month.
Yeah, impossible to understand if you didn't live there and experience it, I'm sure.
40% a month. So the idea of getting modern or whatever was incomprehensible. The first day I arrived, because I was a big shot then now. Okay, now I'm into the big shot range. So I had my car delivered to the house when I arrived so that I could drive it into work the next day. And so I get out the next morning. This is Opel Record, a nice, big, huge car. I get out in the morning and I start my car and it won't start. I was sent down to Brazil by Jack Smith to help them improve their product program. And my car won't start. And I get on the phone and I call Carlos Buchler, who was the chief engineer. I said, Carlos, and he was a friend of mine. Your guys dropped off a car for me, but it won't start. What's going on here? And he said, did you pull out the choke? What? He says, oh, yeah, all of our cars have chokes on them. I went back out, needless to say, pulled out the choke, pumped the gas a couple of times, and boy, that V6 turned right over. So we converted in a period of 5 years to an Opel Corsa, Vectra, Opel Omega, Opel Astra, a new full-size pickup, S10, an S10 with a crew cab, which they didn't have in the United States, new Blazer. I was a busy cowboy. That's when my hair, literally, Jeff, the picture that I have in 1991, when I got my company ID going down there, this is what I had. This was a all hands on deck. Finally, the philosophy of Wagner was, once we get current, we're going to stay current and we're going to drive Volkswagen to the sea. And ultimately we did. We became the number one seller. We went from selling 100,000 cars to 420,000 cars. But the philosophy of Wagner's was, no, we're going to pick the volume that makes sense. Then we're going to determine what engineering and investment we can do. And if it doesn't work, we will not approve it because we're on our own. It was literally an all hands on deck to make that happen. Culture and competency, the right program, and the right leadership that really changed the way that the whole business case was looked at. That's how it turned around.
And it's amazing that General Motors mothership, I mean, my God, what a difference from $100 million loss to what, $1.5 billion winner. My God, if they could have taken those lessons into GM corporate in Europe.
Well, certainly General Motors Europe. They were afraid to make the tough and ruthless decisions. Maybe they felt, and I listened to it all the time. Dick Nerod, who led Latin America for over a decade. Okay, really ruthless. But everybody said, yeah, Dick, but you're running Venezuela and you're running Colombia and Brazil and Argentina. Those are all easy markets. You just don't have the tough ones like Europe and Germany and all the labor laws. And you know what Dick's response was? You guys just want to lose. You want to win? You put me over there and we'll win. Don't tell me how tough it is. You just have to make the right calls. The one that really, really got it, ultimately, too late, was Fritz. Fritz got what was needed to be done and understood it, had a plan for it, and was prepared to execute it. Because Henderson learned under Nerod, and as president, he was prepared to execute. This is published information. The board blinked. He wanted to sell Opel to the Russians. He was prepared to do that. He was prepared to make Chevrolet the brand in Europe. That's a big story in and of itself. The board ultimately blinked and said, no, Opel is too valuable an engineering source. We're going to keep it around. And that bleeding continued until Mary Barra closed the operation, right? It was Mary and everybody in between, all the Whitakers and all of these other people that took over from the bankruptcy, never had the guts. I give Mary credit that she said, we're not making any money, we're done. Now, she didn't have a plan B, but she said, we're done. We're selling it. We're gone. That's it. And that should have been done 2000.
Well, if it wasn't going to be made a profitable division.
I sat in executive meetings, senior executive meetings, of which then I was a senior executive, and therefore I take responsibility for it, that said for 5, 6, 7 years in a row, guys, this year we got to make money. No excuses. How can you say that for 7 years in a row and have a management team believe that to be true, that you really meant it?
Right. And it's also a matter of you're swimming around in your own. So a lot of these guys are swimming around in their own aquarium water. They can't.
Well, they are. Yeah.
Right. Sure. They can't see anything other than what they're used to. The line in the sand moves an inch at a time. And all of a sudden, 7 years goes by. It felt like unlimited, I'm sure, to a lot of these people. They didn't all have the philosophy that you learned early on about hitting this budget. And I want to ask you a question. Did you ever work with Ignacio Lopez?
No, but understood his philosophy.
When you said Dr. Death, I remember reading Automotive News and other publications at the time when he was just beating these suppliers mercilessly to bid to be a GM supplier, and then they'd be in and then bid again. No,
that was, I think it was a little bit of an Achilles heel for Jack Smith, because in the early days when Jack was trying to turn around North America, when they broomed out the old management team and Jack was put in charge of North America, Lopez produced results. If you now look back at the history of it, those results came with a cost. Trust that as long as we were winning, didn't matter whether the suppliers won or not.
I mean, these poor guys, I mean, when you're a General Motors supplier, I mean, for the audience, in case you're not, from the car business or manufacturing business, when you get a GM contract or you get a manufacturer contract, you buy or rent buildings, you hire staff because you're going to make steering wheels or make hinges or do whatever you're going to do, glass, and commit to
serious expenditure, investment expenditure.
Right. And it's a business plan. I mean, it's the very often the GM or manufacturer supplier or even dealership supplier. The whole entire business is built around that agreement.
I think that the idea that you are going to have a purchasing process that enforces that you're going to have multiple bidders and you are going to test the market, not only for the specs that are going to be delivered, but the price that it's going to be delivered at. That process still exists in General Motors today. It's not a bad process. It forces the market to respond. But some of the funny business stuff that was going on, meaning you got the low bid and you may not have liked the supplier or the process, so you sent that and rebid it out after the suppliers divulged all the information. I think that there was probably some problems that were going on then. No, I did not work with him. I will tell you this, though. His right-hand person was excommunicated from Europe in the early days. Volker used to tell the story that he and Lopez couldn't be in the same room together, and one of us had to go. And so Volker Barth, who was as close to Lopez as anybody in the early days, maybe when Lopez was doing some of his best work, was excommunicated to Brazil. And so the purchasing manager that was part of that three-part process that I talked to you about was Volker Barth. He knew all of Lopez's stuff, only he didn't do the other stuff. So for Brazil, remember, Brazil isn't necessarily at the top of the Transparency International ethics scores. And so when Barth came, one of the major things that he did was convert the purchasing process of General Motors do Brazil into the no, boys, we're going to have 3 or 4 bids. They're all going to submit their specs. We're going to have envelopes on the desk, and everybody's going to sit around the table and make the decision about what supplier that we're going to pick. He changed that dramatically. So no, the Lopez process was actually brought to Brazil as part of the culture and competence change that I talked about earlier.
Moving from Brazil, because you are, of course, the most interesting man in the world. From Brazil, you were off to Poland?
In December of 1999, I went to Poland to work. It was dark. Warsaw, if you draw a direct line, is in the middle of Hudson Bay in Canada. You're up there.
So from a latitude standpoint, right. Okay.
Exactly. 3:00 in the afternoon, it is pitch black. It's dark for 18 hours.
So your mood is just wonderful.
And there's snow. Okay. Had to buy a winter coat and all that stuff. Anyways, I guess I would consider myself a sales analysis and forecasting expert. Okay, I'll give myself that and pat myself on the back. The thing that I learned in Poland was manufacturing, because my boss was actually the manufacturing executive of all of Europe. And because I was in charge of the new plant that was being built, I had to report to manufacturing. They don't let clerks who are running $5 billion facilities not report to manufacturing. For me, that was a great experience, because it was the first time, I did a lot of, go back to Brazil, culture, competence, programs, leadership. We approved probably 12 programs in a row at the board level when we were there with that process that I just described. We still had to go to Big Daddy to get approval, right? It was the first time that I had actually not done an analysis of a program or built a product program up. I had to screw it together in an assembly process. That was an eye-opener for me. I think I've told you this story. The car has 3,000 parts. How many cars can you make if you got 2,990 parts? It's a trick question, right?
Right.
Zero. I learned what it took and the discipline that I had no idea of what it takes for those manufacturers. I know why manufacturing people are the way they are. The requirement to take those 3,000 parts, weld them, paint them, put the trim on, put the interior in, get it out the door. I respect anybody today that's doing that. It is such a disciplined process. And so we launched a brand new vehicle for Europe in that plant. And I met some of the most dedicated individuals. One of the guys I met by the name of John Burton, who was a manufacturing guy that they stole from Nissan in the UK. And he became the manufacturing manager at the plant. He taught me Nissan's version of Kaizen. His whole mind was Kaizen.
Which is the Japanese continuous improvement.
Right. His whole mindset was continuous improvement. He would even tell me, Warren, I actually do Kaizen when I'm getting ready in the morning, meaning how much waste can I take out of, can I brush my teeth and shave at the same time? Because that takes time out of my preparation before I can get to the plant. That was his mindset, right? And he was a great guy to teach me that. And the great thing is, we had what we call the Boys of 51. The HR manager at the plant, the plant manager, the manufacturing manager, and myself were all born in 1951. And so we called ourselves the Four Boys of 51. We're still friends to this day. But the thing that I remember most about Poland, other than the experience of the expat culture in Warsaw at that time, 2000, was phenomenal because Poland was changing. Poland was growing. The market was growing. The time that we spent at the Marriott at Warsaw for all of the parties and the expat stuff. And we have friends for life that came out of there. Still to this day, friends for life. Other than my introduction to vodka, it was the manufacturing piece that probably solidified my ultimate work that I did in Russia in terms of going to Russia and running the place.
That was before Germany.
I went to Brazil, Poland, Germany, Russia, Switzerland.
Before we leave Poland, any story for us? Lesson learned, thing you wouldn't do again?
When I went to Poland, when I was in Brazil, I was like the planning guy and the after sales guy, right? I was an executive, but I wasn't the guy yet. So going to Poland was when I got my second nickname. The group executive of Europe was looking for somebody to go to Poland. And so he called Dick Nerad up, who was my boss, and said, I'm looking for somebody to go to Poland. You got anybody? Because I got a list of people. I don't necessarily like the list of people that's on the list. Do you have anybody? He says, well, I got a guy that you may be interested in. He's a little bit of a street fighter. That means I was obnoxious. Okay. And had been through enough to, I think, be self-aware of both my limits, but not enough to keep my mouth shut. I got in most of my trouble when I couldn't keep my mouth shut. He said, he's a little bit of a street fighter. And so he says, well, good. I want to talk to him. And we talked. And in 10 minutes, he said, can you go to Poland? So, Janet, my wife, who cried the day I told her we were moving to Brazil, cried harder on the day I told her we were leaving, but has been a trooper. So every time I said, Jan, I need a favor, she knew we were moving.
Well, in my own conversations with Janet, you could tell how fond she is of Brazil when she talks about.
She had the best of both worlds. She had a husband and a man who would actually pay attention to her. So when we were there, we had a gardener and an all around handyman guy for the estate.
Right.
It was such an estate that I never let my boss come out there in the whole 9 years I was there.
But this, I think, was really about what you could rent for that kind of money, if I recall, right or wrong.
Well, we kind of lived outside. There was an expat community. For some strange reason, we ended up living way out in the country. So my commute was an hour and a half one way every day. The personal story that I can say. Because I was the head guy, I got to deal with the embassy and the ambassador and the charge d'affaires and the Marines. Marines had hot dogs and A&W root beer in the basement of the embassy for Monday Night Football. So you run around with a bunch of amcham muckety mucks, right? Because you were the head guy. But I developed a friendship with Chris Hill, who was the U.S. ambassador to Poland, who was a car nut. So anytime I invited Chris down to the plant to go and tour the plant, he was just a real car nut. And what I didn't know was that he was a World War II buff. So one day we got together and he said, how would you like to go to Cannes, which is the little city by Omaha Beach and all of the places where D-Day landing was? We spent 2 days walking the beaches, touring the graveyard, which is an immaculate place. So we spent 2 days in France, and I would say that was because I was with the ambassador, right? We were taken care of. It was a marvelous trip. That's the one that I can remember off the top of my head that was personal.
So off to
Germany. So I went from managing director of GM Poland to executive director of after sales in Germany, where I was responsible for engineering and purchasing and service and all the parts warehouses. So when you get, a dealer gets parts from a warehouse, whatever, I was in charge of all those. But here is a great cultural story. Sitting in a dealer leadership meeting. I'm talking about the top 20 dealers in Brazil, volume guys, right? From all over the country. And they don't know that I've gone full tilt on learning Portuguese. And they're making fun of me in the meeting.
They're talking about you.
Because I'm a gringo. They're making fun. And I let them go for a while. And I'm pretending like I have no idea what they're doing. No mouth flinches, no nothing. And they're done. And in fluent Portuguese, I said to them, I think because I'm in charge of all of your warranty audits, I'm doing this in Portuguese now.
Yeah.
Because I'm in charge of all of your warranty audits and all of your service rules, I suggest that you guys talk to me a lot nicer than you have been for the last 15 minutes. And the whole room busted out laughing. And then one day, Wagner comes into me. He said, I need somebody to go to Russia. And I said, well, why are you talking to me? He said, Russia is complex, and I need somebody who I can trust. And that's you.
Well, that says a lot about you.
So I went home one more time. Jan, I need a favor. Here's what we're going to do, Warren. You're going to move to Russia. And here's what you're going to ask them for. We keep the house in Germany. We go to Moscow and we rent you a great apartment. And then we can travel back and forth. But I'm not moving to Russia. Is that all you need? Well, no, but I'm not moving. I want to keep this house in Germany. I have friends in Germany. I have bridge friends in Germany. I ain't moving again. So I went to Wagner, keeping the house in Germany. Oh, first I went to HR. Here's a life lesson.
Okay.
You do a deal with the boss, don't go to HR because they're not going to support you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to keep the house in Germany. We're going to get an apartment in Moscow. And then you're going to give me an allowance to fly back and forth all the time. Oh, well, wait a minute here. Oh, we don't do that. That's not HR policy. Who told you you could do this? Do you really want to know? I mean, I'm coming in here telling you this is a done deal. Who told you you could do this? Rick Wagner. Why don't we get him on the phone? Oh, Rick told you that? Yeah. Well, I guess we can make an exception. And it was the best job I ever had. I had a full-time driver, which was fantastic. I had the only white Escalade in Russia. And why did I have a white Escalade? Because every one of the cops in Moscow, after 2 months, knew, oh, That's the guy who's not going to pay us a bribe.
End of part 1. Make sure to listen to part 2.
This has been Jeff Stearns, Connected Through Cars.